America is deeply racist, and its democracy is flawed, both economically and socially. The Black Revolution is much more than a struggle for the rights of Negroes. It is forcing America to face all its interrelated flaws: racism, poverty, militarism, and materialism. It is exposing evils that are rooted deeply in the whole structure of our society. It reveals systematic rather than superficial flaws and suggests that radical reconstruction of society itself is the real issue to be faced. Dr. King.
My name is Cheryl Distaso, and I work with the Fort Collins Community Action Network, and I also teach in the social work program for graduate students. I teach the community organizing class. I want to thank Nevin Manville and the Slice office for putting this together. It's part of Homelessness Awareness and Action Month. Willie Baptist is a formerly homeless father of 3 who came out of the Watts uprisings and the Black student movement. He has 50 years of experience educating and organizing among the poor and dispossessed, including working as a lead organizer with the United Steelworkers, as an educator and organizer with the National Union of the Homeless and its educational arm, the Annie Smart Leadership Development Institute, as the education director of the Kensington Welfare Rights Union for 10 years, and as a lead organizer and educator for the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, as well as many other networks. He's a board member of the National Welfare Rights Union, the United Workers of Maryland, Picture the Homeless in New York, and on the advisory committee for the Wildfire Project. Willie is the author of numerous books, articles, and pamphlets, including The Pedagogy of the Poor, which there aren't any left, so they didn't bring any, but you can get them online. And this is actually the book that I found while I was writing my master's thesis, and immediately became engaged with Willie's work, and started a book group where we read this book for months, and then we ended up bringing Willie out here a couple of years ago, and we wanted more, so we brought him back. Willie presently serves as the Poverty Initiative Scholar in Residence and the co-coordinator of the Poverty Scholarship and Leadership Development for the Kairos Center. John Wessel-McCoy is the Poor People's Campaign program organizer at the Kairos Center. He develops relationships and grassroots community, religious, and labor leaders nationwide. In addition, he researches and develops curriculum focused on history, particularly focused on lessons from the abolitionist movement. He's worked as a union organizer with parking attendants, child care providers, and home health care workers, in addition to doing community organizing with the homeless and low-income residents in Chicago. He earned an MA in 2009 from Union Theological Seminary and was awarded the Charles Augustus Briggs Award, given to graduates who demonstrated qualities of conscious commitment and courage as exemplified in the life and work of Charles Augustus Briggs. He grew up Roman Catholic and continues to identify with the social justice and liberative social teaching in his tradition. Paul Boden is the executive and organizing director of the Western Regional Advocacy Center, WRAP. He became homeless at the age of 16. He began volunteering at a drop-in shelter in San Francisco in 1983, eventually becoming a program director there. Then he worked as a case manager in a supportive hotel program for mentally ill people. Paul served as the executive director of San Francisco's Coalition on Homelessness for 16 years and was the founder of the Community Housing Partnership. Lynn Thompson got involved with homeless rights as a student, doing direct legal outreach and advocacy work in Berkeley and Oakland. She joined the Homeless Coalition in Fort Collins just a few months after moving here in 2014, and we spent a lot of time working together. So we'll start with Willie and John, and then we'll move into Paul, and then we'll move into Lynn, and have a few questions in between, and then we'll have a larger discussion at the end.
Since the defeat of the old Poor People's Campaign, Dr. Martin Luther King, as not too many people know about this, but in the last years of his life, he launched the Poor People's Campaign. And he was assassinated, he was killed, and that preempted it. It set the stage for his defeat, and very little happened after that. I was part of an effort, along with Paul, of a national organizing drive among the homeless union. We organized at the height somewhere between 25 to 30,000 homeless folks. This is homeless men and women organizing themselves. We had founding conventions in LA where we had over 1,000 delegates in the founding convention. In New York at Riverside Church, the famous Riverside Church, we had over 1,200 delegates. That was the seeds for the development of this process. I come out of that process. Others are coming from other struggles that are taking place around healthcare, around all the basic needs that people are saddled with and are struggling over. So this movement is, I would date it back maybe earlier than even the homeless union organizing drive, but that organizing drive started in 1980. But there's been a momentum that's been accelerated, especially since the 2008 crisis. They say officially that the crisis was over in 2009. That's the official. But the fact is that people are still hurting. And more people are hurting. And homelessness is growing by leaps and bounds. Many of the middle strata income are becoming impoverished. This is the reality of our country. They showed the statistics about the growth of jobs. But these jobs are low-paid jobs. And under slavery, everybody had a job. If you want to whipside your head in some cold bacon, you had a job. We're talking about jobs that are not slave wages, decent paying jobs. These are the kinds of jobs that we deserve and we need. This is what we built our country for our lives, and this is what we're fighting for. So these are the issues that we are raising, and again, people are responding, man. People are responding all over the country, and I think we reached a moment where something really can happen. If we all choose to take a position, take a stand wherever we are, I think we can build a powerful movement in this country to move these issues and make this country a better country. The problem is one that is one of a growing polarity between wealth and poverty, where on the one hand, the growing majority of us are being threatened or being impoverished. And then you have a few who are concentrating tremendous wealth. But you have this tremendous discrepancy where you have growing homelessness and poverty in the midst of plenty. This is not a problem of scarcity. This is not a case of poor Peter being robbed to pay poor Paul. This is the way our priorities and the way our society is organized, where those of us who are have been working all our lives, are being thrown into homelessness, or put in a situation where our life situation is being threatened. This is in America. Something can be done about it, but we have to do something about it in order for it to be done.
My name is John Wessel-McCoy. I work with Willie out in New York, and I am going to do a little piece on the history of the original Poor People's Campaign. This is the main thing that Dr. King and others in 1968 were really trying to come to terms with. And this question of the divide and conquer, the disunity of the poor and dispossessed in this country. In terms of lessons learning from the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, anybody familiar with the Riverside speech, 1967? Right? This is where he comes out against the war in Vietnam. And this is also the period he's moving into building a movement, multiracial, cross-color lines, cross-region, of the Poor People's Campaign. And he's linking these two things together, the Vietnam War, the militarism. In that speech, and around that time, some of the speeches King's giving, he refers to these triplet evils, right? Racism, poverty, and militarism. Or sometimes he would say materialism rather than poverty, right? And sometimes he would say exploitation, economic exploitation. A lot of times when he was talking to people he trusted, rather than like talking to stuff that the New York Times or whatever was going to report on. He was more clear about the class aspect, about the poverty aspect, and the exploitation aspect. So anyway, we would say today with this new Poor People's Campaign, if we were to take those triple evils, and you can't deal one without the other. And also people are right to point out, along with racism, other forms of oppression, right? We would also, I'd say, put in here the ecological crisis today.
Now when we see there must be a radical redistribution of economic and political power, then we see that for the last 12 years we have been in a reform movement. We were seeking to reform certain conditions in the house of our nation because the nation wasn't living up to the very rules of the house that it was prescribed in the Constitution. Then after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. I think we must see the great distinction between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. And this was by King in 1967.
The Washington campaign, the actual Poor People's Campaign, were a multiracial organization of poor folks from around the country converged on Washington. Took place between May 12th and June 24th of 1968. When was King actually gunned down? Do people know? April 4th. That's right, April 4th night. So he was killed before this actually could take place. This is the last thing. And even being in Memphis with the organization of the sanitation workers, he saw as part of the Poor People's Campaign, right? Sanitation workers fighting for the rights. So just a little quick, some images here. This obviously the Washington Mall, Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, and this is Solidarity Day. There's like, I'm not totally sure what the turnout was on that day, but it was one of the big mobilizations. But what I point out here is there's this Resurrection City over on the side. They basically built an encampment on the Washington Mall, and this was a multiracial encampment of folks from all around the country who stayed here for a few months. They built these clapboard houses out of plywood. They put in their own water system, and there were a lot of other amenities they tried to put in. There was about 3,000 folks who occupied there. There was more than that, but at any given time, there was about 3,000 people. And here are some of the residents. They had their own bakery. I like this picture because, people are like, okay, let's do a mobilization. We're going to win these concrete victories and things like that. But what I see in this picture here is people who come from a lot of different places, never been in the same place together. And this thing of people being around and being around the fire, sharing culture, music, poetry, all this kind of stuff. It was actually a huge part of the campaign, was the way that there was a shared culture. It rained. It was 40 some odd days for that, and it rained like 23 of those 40 days, which was huge. The media paid a lot of attention to that, but obviously this is a major drawback. Miles Horton, who's one of my heroes, said, "When the rain started, a shelter was built above the fire where coffee was always boiling and around which good conversation or singing was always taking place. The scheduled session soon gave way to an 18-hour round of informal discussions, arguments, music, singing, coffee drinking, and eating." These caravans that came from all around the country, there was actually a lot of folks who came from Colorado, both indigenous leadership. Tilly Walker, I think at the time, was based out of here, and a lot of, like, especially for this young sort of Chicano organization that ultimately was their participation in this campaign set the stage for them to sort of develop this sort of youth organization, and there was a lot of stuff like that. But these caravans came from all over. The most famous one was the mule train that came out of Marks, Mississippi, which was the poorest county. Quitman County was the poorest county. The folks actually rode from Mississippi to D.C. With this mule train. The leadership of women in this Poor People's Campaign was really substantial. And the group that we have a long history, it's part of our own sort of legacy, is working with welfare rights. And the National Welfare Rights Organization, this is them on Solidarity Day.
I'd come up off the streets in the early 80s in a neighborhood called the Tenderloin in San Francisco. But I wasn't homeless based on some of the issues that I'll be showing you as we go through this really quick PowerPoint presentation. I was homeless because my mom died and my father was an asshole. And we got kicked out into the street. And I was 16 years old. And I was a white boy from Long Island, Port Washington, privileged, went to good elementary schools, and suddenly found myself and my sisters found themselves with nowhere to go. That kind of stuff has been around forever. My father wasn't the first asshole. He won't be the last, unfortunately. So there have been, and when they talk about historic people, there's always been homelessness. Not like we're seeing today. There have not been millions of people sleeping out on the street. Having been old enough to be around, I was bouncing around, but on First Avenue and 16th Street in New York, I got a friend, and for $150 each, we were able to rent a flat. A funky-ass flat, but a flat. You know, you were able to hustle up little side jobs, and you could cover your ass and have a place to live. Those places are gone. You also, if you had a family, when I was starting out in the early 80s, if I had a senior citizen or if I had somebody with a disability that I could get onto Social Security benefits, it would take me a week or two to find them a Section 8 unit that they could live in, to get them into some sort of treatment that they could then start addressing some of the issues that they were dealing with, the health issues that they were dealing with in their lives. That was the early 80s. That wasn't that long ago. That is gone. There are now, in San Francisco, there's over 1,200 names of people that they've collected to get on a waiting list for emergency shelter. That kind of destroys the concept of an emergency shelter program. And so in the mid-'80s, a couple of us started getting together, some of the organizations in LA, in Seattle, in Portland, in Denver, in Sacramento. We started getting together and saying, how are we going to change this debate? We keep hearing about how we're dysfunctional and how we need to be rehabilitated to fit back into society, but we knew there wasn't no people, poor people in Congress that voted to cut the HUD budgets when Reagan was the president of the United States. There wasn't no poor people running HUD when they decided to dismantle public housing and start mortgaging off public housing units, or to commodify the aspect of housing and housing development funding. It wasn't poor people that created the situation. We didn't have the power to create the situation. And yet, we're the ones that are being deemed dysfunctional. We're the ones where public parks are being closed at night. We're the ones where people are being told if you sit on a sidewalk, you're breaking the law and you can go to jail. You don't see shoppers that are sitting on the sidewalk and eating an ice cream cone or taking a break. You don't see construction workers that are eating their lunch and taking a break, going to jail for sitting on a public sidewalk. And you gotta start thinking about, how did we get to a point where somebody sitting is criminal? Well, we got to that point because local governments have chosen to address the issue of homelessness by making homeless people disappear. And the first step in making any group of people disappear is you have to dehumanize them. People won't support laws and discriminatory policing practices and policies if they see the people suffering from the consequence from that bullshit as human beings. They have to be dehumanized first before you can criminalize their presence and before you can chase them out of a community. So we kept saying this. And L.A. Ken would be saying it in Skid Row, and we'd be saying it in San Francisco, and it wasn't resonating. So at that point, we realized that our individual voices were not going to change the situation. The only way we were going to do it was by start joining forces. And these were the organizations that came together and said, we're not going to wait for what we see in our realities becoming the dialogue and wait for the National Alliance to End Homelessness or the United Way or any of those other organizations that seem to incredibly well benefit from our existence out in the streets. We're not going to wait. We're going to create our own voice. You see the artwork on the wall. I hope that you would look at the fact sheets on the table, and I'll explain why, but you'll notice that the artwork and the fact sheets duplicate each other. We work with groups of artists, and I'm not just talking about friends that know how to draw, like artists that see themselves as organizers. One of the key components for us as an organization is we're unique. We're not all the same. Not every issue in Skid Row is the same as the issues that exist in San Francisco or in Sacramento, but all of our issues connect to these primary contexts. You can't just look at what happened in 1983 when we started opening shelters and say, oh, that's when homelessness started. No, it's not. Our DNA didn't change where suddenly people said, you know, this living indoors, man, this is kind of old. I think I want to go sleep outside. That's where I really want to be living. No, what happened was there's a list of economic and social factors and historical context of Band-Aid solutions addressing poverty, not just homelessness. Always understand, homelessness is just a very visible manifestation of poverty. There are no rich homeless people. In the 80s, they used to talk about, oh, I can't wait to find the bag lady with millions of dollars. Bull, I've been doing this for 35 years. It doesn't exist. Rich people don't choose to go sleep out in the street. And if they did, they sure as hell wouldn't do it in Fort Collins in November. They wouldn't have done it last night, I can tell you that. You have to look at addressing the issue of homelessness by looking at neoliberal economic policies, by looking at racism, and by looking at classism. And if you miss that capitalization of existence, if you miss the fact that Reagan's revolution was bringing neoliberal economic policies from South and Central America, where United Fruit Company created banana republics, that was the pilot program. When they decided we're going to really now start kicking ass and implement neoliberal economics, they got their showman, their actor from Hollywood into the White House, and we called it trickle-down economics. And every mantra from Ronald Reagan for 8 years was government is bad, government is stupid, government is unaccountable. Look at now. Privatize schools, privatize public parks, privatize public spaces, business improvement districts running downtown areas, privatize housing, low-income housing credits, mortgaging off public housing, privatize our welfare system when they did welfare reform. They called it a contract with America, signed by a Democrat, signed by Clinton. They called it a contract with America. We called it a contract on America. They talk about the $34 billion that Saudi Arabia got from us. We can't afford housing. Look at the housing cuts that are coming down on that fact sheet. We can't afford that. But the Trump administration, when their first days, gave $34 billion to Saudi Arabia to buy military aid. Guess who they're buying it from, folks? That was about channeling money to private industry. That's neoliberal economics. And we got McDonald's in freaking national parks now. Why? Why is it that it has to generate a profit for private business in order for it to be a worthwhile investment of our government? Why wouldn't a government want people educated, healthy, housed, and earning a living wage? Why would that be seen as bad for government? To have educated, healthy, and housed population. It makes no sense if you take out the economic neoliberal incentive that's built into why these decisions are being made. So in order for us to understand this, we looked at, in the 1930s, when we created what today we call HUD, it was called the Public Housing Agency back then, the people organizing during the Depression era that led to the creation of public housing as a concept, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have Google. They were kick-ass, hardcore organizers, and we were facing a homeless crisis. The last time we had a homeless crisis before the 1980s, we created the Housing Act of 1937, notice WPA era program. But if you look at what it says was the responsibility of that agency, you get a clear sense that the federal government was saying, we need to get off the toilet and start paying attention to what the hell is going on in our local communities. And a lot of it, if you've seen Grapes of Wrath or any of that, the federal government was setting up encampments for homeless people and protecting them from local vigilantes and from the local sheriff's departments. You don't see that today. You don't see the federal government doing anything to respond to the criminalization of people that are suffering from decisions that were made by the federal government. When I mentioned the contract with America in 1998, they changed the preamble to that bill and specifically relieved themselves of the obligation to ensure housing for even a majority of the citizens. They knew goddamn well what was going down. We started opening our shelters in 1983. In 1998, instead of saying we got a crisis in our communities, we need to respond to it by building the housing that was destroyed and defunded that created the issue of homelessness, they said, well, we better put it in the law so no one can sue us, that it's no longer our responsibility to be providing that for poor people. And we've certainly seen massive housing being built, but it's all condos and it's all tax breaks to developers to build more luxury condos. So it's the commodification of housing that literally put millions of people out in the street. And if you look at these numbers, and these are about 3 years old at this point, we have to update it, but you're talking about over 600,000 units of affordable housing that were lost just in this one program. Those units weren't empty. The people that lived in those units didn't suddenly become rich. Those people became the homeless population that we talk about today. Those people became the dysfunctional, need life skills training. I love that life skills training concept. It started with welfare reform. It's the prevalent thing within homeless programs. You're going to train me how to set a freaking alarm clock? How stupid do you think I am? And when you're talking about young social workers coming out and training poor families life skills, try living in those projects and thinking you don't have life skills. Try living in those communities and thinking you don't have life skills. You got life skills. They may not be the life skills recognized by the mainstream as legitimate, but sure as hell, if you're still alive and your kids are still fed and your kids are still healthy, you sure as hell got life skills. Sorry, that pisses me off. And I think it's also important to note this wasn't just, we talk about homelessness and we talk about cities. And, you see, there's an article today in the paper, the Denver freaking Post, and it's like, homelessness is up on the West Coast, and they talk about Seattle, and they talk about Portland, and they talk about Los Angeles. This wasn't just a city phenomenon. Back in that 1937 era, they created HUD, what we now call HUD. They created the public housing agencies. But in rural communities, they already had the United States Department of Agriculture. So they funded affordable housing development in rural communities through the USDA. And if you see here, just in this one housing program, they went in the late 70s at building 30,000 units of affordable housing in rural communities every year, to zero, and still today the program's gone now. They've just eliminated. They stopped even publishing the numbers because the number's been zero since 2012. It's a clear statement that homelessness is not the responsibility, and the federal government does not deem itself as being accountable for the advent of contemporary homelessness, nor in actually creating a solution to contemporary homelessness. So here we just talk, this you can read. You're in college. I hope you can read this. So I don't need to read it to you, but you can see these numbers and you can understand these numbers, and you need to really appreciate that these numbers are human beings. These aren't just academic figures. These are when you walk past people, and there's a 1.3 million people that go to school every day that don't have a home to go to at night. So you're walking past homeless people without even knowing it in the hallways of your own university. Yes, yes. And the reality is, these are human beings. Now, this is about what has happened. This is the cuts. This is the opening of emergency shelter programs. It was so blatantly obvious. I mean, it's not like we're brilliant and we figured it out. We just went and looked at the federal budget, noticed that at the same time, me and my friends were opening shelter programs to address a temporary crisis. And in the first days of shelter programs, they were funded by FEMA. It was under an emergency context, and everything was considered a temporary facility. 35 years later, they're considered housing and a tier of housing. But then again, so are bus tickets, if you can figure that one out. 5 minutes and then okay. But what we did see really pick up and really get invested in was the number of laws that are on the books to criminalize the presence of homeless people. And Denver University did a kick-ass study using the same methodology. This chart is based on California's study, but you see a corresponding uptick in criminalization of people that are poor and homeless. And I would refer you, if you pick the stuff up, to the chart here that has these bar graphs on it. We talked to 1,600 homeless people so far. We're still doing the outreach. The top 3 criminal offenses that they are going to jail for, that they are getting tickets for, that they are getting harassed for, is sleeping, sitting, and standing still. That's it. And you're talking 81%, 74%, 76%. Sleeping, sitting, and standing still. And eating is up in the top 5. Panhandling is up in the top 5. These are the criminal offenses that homeless people are telling us are the offenses that they are being charged with by local police departments. So when we looked at all of these laws that are being passed in local communities, there were on average 11 laws on the books in 72 communities that we looked at in California. I'll give you those numbers. Where as soon as a homeless person stopped walking, everything else you did was criminal. Standing still, you're loitering. Sitting down, you're blocking the sidewalk, or you're sitting. Sitting is literally a criminal offense. Laying down, sleeping, eating, these are all criminal offenses. So as soon as you stop walking, the cops can have carte blanche authority, legal authority, to criminalize your presence and your existence. That's the core of the Right to Rest Act. That's why we're running the Right to Rest Act in California, in Oregon, and in California. I mean, in Colorado. Yeah, Colorado, you guys heard of Colorado, right? And I would then refer you to this handout. We looked at anti-Okie laws, we looked at Jim Crow laws, we looked at sundown towns, we looked at ugly laws, which were probably the most blatant in terms of being honest and straightforward. Diseased, maimed, mutilated so as to be unsightly. At least they were honest about it. We looked at these laws and we looked at today's laws, and they're identical. Wow. Using the same laws. Local governments have taken advantage of their legal authority to pass local ordinances and direct local police enforcement to rid their communities of people that they don't like. The people being targeted has changed. Japanese American Exclusion Act, Basurero Treaty, ugly laws was disabled people, anti-Okie laws was homeless people, Jim Crow laws was African American people. The laws themselves have changed. The laws that the people, the targets have changed. But the laws have been identical, and the enforcement practices have been identical, and the pattern of dehumanizing people before you launch these campaigns has been identical. So our campaign is to say nobody can be arrested under these laws. If you are not obstructing anybody else, you can stand, sit, sleep, lay down, and eat legally, and you cannot be criminalized. Not just homeless people, nobody can be criminalized, because we know we weren't the first targets, and we're pretty confident, based on history, that we won't be the last target. So when you hear about the Right to Rest Act and they say it's about the homeless, it's just homeless people trying to make sure that no one else deals with the bullshit that we've been dealing with for the last 35 years. This is a funding chart. You've all heard that. We spend more on military than on housing. Just letting you know, in case you're curious. This stuff is on our website. This stuff is documented. When you have a mouth like mine, you better know what you're talking about. We're running this in 3 different states. We've debated the head of homelessness for Bush administration, for Clinton administration. Our facts are from the federal government. They can't deny it. And we feel like with 2 less submarines, 29 less jets, Canada wouldn't be invading us anytime soon. So we would still be the most powerful military in the world, and we could double the funding that we're spending on homelessness today. A housing subsidy is a housing subsidy, and then I promise Cheryl I'll shut up. A housing subsidy, if you owe me $50 and I tell you to keep it, I just gave you $50. That's a tax credit. That's called economic stimulus. That's God's gift to the economy for some reason. If you ask me for $50 and I give you $50, I just gave you $50. That's called charity. That's called, I don't know if you're worthy of it or not. That's called, well, do you have a felony record? Where were you born? Are you left-handed, blue-eyed, whatever. They're identical. Identical. Yet we spend $144 billion a year subsidizing housing for homeowners. $144 billion. It's done through the IRS. It's not even a budget line item. It doesn't get debated. However many people qualify for, are paying a mortgage, qualify for that housing subsidy. We spend $34 billion a year on housing, affordable housing for poor people. We're freaking out as to whether or not they're worthy of it, as to how many toothbrushes are in their bathroom. They literally check how many toothbrushes you got in your bathroom to make sure no one's living there that isn't on the lease. You can't smoke a cigarette within 25 feet of a public housing facility because, God forbid, you do things that they don't care whether it's bad for us or not. They care about having reasons to kick us the hell out, so that they can take us off the waiting list. Because just in San Francisco, there's 22,000 people on the waiting list for affordable housing. You know what they did in response to that? They closed the waiting list. They stopped taking names, and that's true in every city across the country. You got too many people that can't access your program? Close the list of people that are waiting to access your program. Voila, problem solved. Make up rules. Make up one strike. Thousands of people lost their housing under one strike. One strike in the media was, well, they were convicted of a crime. Bull. One strike did not involve a conviction. It involved an accusation. And just being accused of a crime was enough to get you kicked out and to keep you out of public housing, because they had no intention of matching the housing subsidies for one class of Americans and providing it to everybody. And if housing is good for homeowners, it's probably pretty good for people that can't afford to own a home as well. So it's not about the value of housing, it's about how we value who's getting that housing subsidy. And most of that $144 billion goes to mortgage companies, real estate bankers, and real estate agents and bankers. And so therefore, it's economic stimulus. Therefore, it's God's gift to the housing industry. And most of the money for poor people's housing goes to local communities and to poor people to help build and manage that housing. And therefore, it's charity, and we can't afford it no more. This is just a vicious cycle. It keeps going. You can take this is the one that resonates with service providers the most, because they're the ones that have to do these ridiculous chronic homeless plans, life skill plans, 10-year plans, 5-year plans. Since I've been around since '83 doing this, I can tell you every administration develops a new set of plans so that they can spend 3 to 6 years writing plans so that by the time the plan is supposed to have achieved its goal, they're no longer the administration in charge. It's not their problem. And the next administration kicks in and they start a whole cycle all over again of a whole new set of plans. It's really vicious. You look in our jails, you look in our streets, you look in our homeless programs. Don't tell me racism isn't a goddamn issue in the United States. This is the issue I was talking to you about before. This is what led to our program. This is the historical connection. I do want to point out this poster. Notice the date from the mayor of New York in 1936. Remember earlier I showed you a slide. We started what we now call public housing in 1937. Cities could do more than just criminalize our presence. They could work with us to fight the federal government to be goddamn accountable to making sure people have a decent place to live. This is our campaign. You saw the sign-up sheet. You'll hear about us through Fort Collins, Homeless Coalition, the Denver Homeless Out Loud. There's a website. I mean, there's a Facebook page. There's all that shit. We need support. We've had it 3 times. We've brought it and got it introduced in the state capitol. It's time to realize this is a human rights and a social justice issue, whether it's being launched by homeless groups or not. It's not just about homelessness. It's about all of us. You could be the next target. You may not think that, but you could be. And if you want to ensure that nobody is the next target, join the Homeless Bill of Rights campaign and help us get these goddamn bills passed once and for all. Thank you all very much.
My name is Lynn. I'm here to talk about the Fort Collins Homeless Coalition. Some of you know this because you've stood up with us in one forum or another, or in many forums, and for a lot of things. It's so good to see friends here. Fort Collins Homeless Coalition came together over the summer of 2014. That was the summer that police in Fort Collins began doing large-scale ticketing events, sweeps in the middle of the night down by the river where they would round people up, wake people up, and give dozens of tickets in a single night. We work locally. You can see us on the steps of City Hall. We work on the statewide Right to Rest campaign. And we work on issues that arise from the experience of being homeless in Fort Collins. I believe that the only effective, humanizing way to do this is by applying the kind of systemic analysis that Willie and Paul have presented. And John, sorry. We cannot make homelessness rare, short-lived, and non-recurring, or even provide meaningful short-term services at the same time as we imagine homelessness and poverty to be the result of individual bad choices. We need to understand that poverty, inequality, and homelessness result from policy choices, and on the local level, we need to work to make our policymakers understand that too, so that we can move in a better direction. I'm going to talk tonight about just 3 of our many projects. I'm going to talk a little bit about our ongoing local efforts to fight criminalization, mostly in the context of our camping ban. I'm going to talk about why we need a Colorado Right to Rest Act, although I think Paul really made that case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our current campaign for bathrooms and drinking water in Fort Collins. Real quick about Fort Collins. We have a critical lack of affordable housing here. We're not, people like to think that our community is exceptional in one way or another. We fit every graph that Paul showed. We have a lack of affordable housing that is being accelerated and accentuated by the kind of growth spurt that we've been seeing in the last few years. Right now, as we sit here, Fort Collins has less than 1% rental availability. I looked it up, and this year so far, the median sale price for a single-family home rose to $392,500 in Fort Collins. If you need affordable housing, subsidized housing, and you want a housing voucher, there's a 2 to 4 year wait list right now for a housing voucher that seems to be growing. That means that if you became homeless tomorrow, you got on that list for a voucher that same day, you could expect to be on the streets for 2 to 4 years while you waited for that voucher to come through. We have people in this room who could talk about that from personal experience, and people all over our community who are going through that experience. Fort Collins has about a dozen anti-homeless laws on our books. Not all of them are enforced. The ones that are enforced aren't all enforced equally. But the ones we enforce do tend to be enforced aggressively. And besides the laws currently on the books, we've seen new attempts at criminalization every year, sometimes several times a year for the last few years. I recognize a lot of faces from people who came out to fight the sit-lie bans that have come forward. But also, I want to point out that almost every time we have a community conversation about homelessness in Fort Collins, where people show up to talk about this, you hear suggestions to criminalize almost every kind of behavior from members of the general populace, from city officials, from police officers. It is not an unpopular idea. Here's an illustration of our enforcement practices. Fort Collins writes more camping tickets than any other municipality in Colorado except for Boulder. And we seem to be catching up to Boulder. So this is my graph of the last 8 years of tickets that have been given out under just one of our anti-homeless laws, our public camping ordinance. We've gone up from 73 tickets in 2010 to 349 tickets in 2017 just through September. And I just want to be clear, that little green cap is a projection for what we're going to get to by the end of the year. It looks like we are probably going to break 400 tickets this year, but we've already broken all previous records. We need a Colorado Right to Rest Act. We need it here in Fort Collins. And I don't mean that we should stop fighting against our anti-homeless laws here, that we should stop doing the local work that we do. But the fact is that our city council has had the opportunity to change our camping ban, to change our laws and practices. This issue has come forward many times. Homeless Coalition has been asking for the city to repeal the ban since 2014, but I want to be clear that homeless people in Fort Collins have been asking for this for a lot longer than that, and they have not been listening. Instead, what the city seems to be doing is overseeing more camping enforcement and considering a sit-lie ban roughly every 9 months. This does not seem like a policy our local government is eager to step away from. A baseline for human rights across Colorado would have an immediate beneficial effect on people's lives. That graph is people's lives. But it would also challenge cities to find some other way of dealing with homelessness. I said before that we cannot make homelessness rare, short-lived, and non-recurring while also imagining that homelessness and poverty are the result of individual bad choices. This is about dehumanization. But let's look at what our city has to say. This is a publication from our Office of Social Sustainability, the City of Fort Collins Office of Social Sustainability. The title of this publication is Dealing with Difficult Behaviors, and the ostensible purpose, at least as I understand it, is to help educate the public about what kind of laws Fort Collins has, what is and is not legal in Fort Collins. This is the part about what they call sanitary risks. So here's what the city of Fort Collins has to say about bodily waste. It's there where the toilet paper roll is. Bodily waste. Yes, everybody makes it sometimes, but it's a private ordeal that needs to stay in a designated receptacle. It is generally not okay to swim, bathe, or wash dishes in pools, fountains, or other man-made bodies of water. Unless you're a duck, then swimming is okay, but dishwashing is still out. About camping, little tent clip art there, it says, camping on public property is generally not allowed. This includes spending the night, setting up a homestead, or crashing temporarily to conduct domestic activities, like letting your pet duck wash his dishes. This is a shame-based approach. It is not something, we can't shame people out of their need for sleep. We can't shame someone out of the need to go to the bathroom. This is insulting, it's dehumanizing, and it doesn't lead us towards some kind of solution. So here's what the Fort Collins Homeless Coalition has to say about bodily waste. Fort Collins needs bathrooms. Human waste is actually, it comes off a lot and is cited as a reason for our camping ban, as well as other laws that we have. It comes up in the context of, well, we need camping laws because you just won't believe the mess that people make in the woods. You can't pass a law that stops people from needing to go to the bathroom. You can't stop a law that can't pass a law that stops people from needing sleep or food or air to breathe. We don't have a single 24/7 public restroom. We have one that will be 24/7. This is the bathroom at Oak Street between College and Remington at the parking lot there. When the Oak Street bathroom reopens, which it should do by the end of the year, it will be open 24/7. That's because homeless people in Fort Collins have done extensive lobbying over the past few years to make this happen. There are actually 2 porta potties at Oak Street now, which could be accessible overnight. Those are only there because the Homeless Coalition pushed the city to do it. The city is technically obliged to put up porta potties anytime they close a bathroom for construction, but they said they forgot. I could talk about bathrooms pretty much all night. Oops. But earlier today, Willie asked me, how did the Homeless Coalition start talking about bathrooms in the first place? How does this kind of project become a focus for local organizing? Because I think sometimes when we're imagining something that's the Poor People's Campaign, we're imagining really big marches in the streets where we're marching and there's going to be world peace and it's going to be great and we're going to solve this once and for all. And here I've got something I'm really proud of, and it's a pit toilet. There's kind of a disconnect between those two things. And so I kind of wanted to talk about how did we end up talking about bathrooms so much. I don't know if you know this bathroom, but this bathroom is in Gustav Swanson Natural Area. Gustav Swanson is on Linden Street. It lies almost exactly halfway in between our 2 shelters. It's the closest public restroom to both shelters, and for people who sleep or eat meals at the shelters, they pass it multiple times a day. Until about 1.5 years ago, this bathroom was locked. So when the Homeless Coalition started having meetings, it took us a while to kind of find a format to have those meetings. And when our meetings started including large numbers of people who were homeless, this bathroom came up all the time, usually just as a question. People didn't come in and they didn't say, hey, I've got a campaign for you. It's got 4 steps and we desperately need these 3 things. They came in and they said, hey, I'm wondering if you guys know why there's a padlock on the door of the Gustav Swanson bathroom. How come that bathroom's never open? And so we did the obvious thing and we formed a committee and started working on answering that question. And this bathroom is in a natural areas, so we met with the Parks Department and the Natural Areas Rangers. And we were told, well, this bathroom can't be reopened. We just have to close it because people make messes in this bathroom. They tamper with it. Or maybe, and there were a lot of hints, but no one ever spelled this out, so I don't really have a juicy story, but maybe they are even getting up to illegal activities in this bathroom. So every public bathroom in the world is subject to tampering and messes and sometimes even illegal activities. People still need bathrooms. So our little committee took that information. We kept meeting with people to find out what it would actually take to open this bathroom up. And people who were homeless started going to city council to talk about the experience of having this bathroom closed. That sometimes if you're on your way from one shelter to another and you really have to go to the bathroom and you come to this and it's locked, and they would stand up in front of that microphone. If you've been in city council, it is the most exposed feeling. And to stand up there and talk about that time when you really wanted to go to the bathroom, but there was a padlock in the door and you just had to go in the bushes. Or that time when you had your period and you just really needed someplace that wasn't in a public park. And they did this over and over again. The thing about closing a bathroom, because people make messes in there, is that you're going back to that shame-based approach. You're going back to taking away nice things because sometimes people just, we just can't trust people with nice things. This is just a design problem. There are bathrooms that are manufactured to be tamper-proof. There are ways to modify an outhouse so that tampering and messes and things like that are reduced. You can put a little security camera. You can see one in the picture on the left there, if there's our safety or legality issues. And so people kept telling their stories, and we kept walking city staff through that, and they opened this bathroom. That's local organizing. At the same time, this bathroom is only open from dawn till dusk. It doesn't end when the padlock comes off the door. This bathroom could be open overnight. So I want to talk about this problem where when you dehumanize people, you can't see real solutions. This is Old Town Square. I don't know if you guys have gotten a chance to see it under all this snow. But for those of us who live here, this is the heart of our downtown. And in 2015, Old Town Square underwent a $3.9 million renovation. They put in a fire feature. They moved that iconic eagle fountain that's up there. And they installed this squirty pool thing that fills up with really cute kids in the summertime. And they took out the drinking fountain. So while we were trying to figure this part out, an intern from a student, Sarah, who's right there, and he does great work, wrote to Matt Robineau. Matt Robineau is the executive director of the Downtown Development Authority, and she asked him, why did you take the drinking fountain out? So he wrote back and he said, the Downtown Development Authority removed the water fountain because it did not meet current health and safety codes relative to its plumbing, and it was a seasonal feature that required shutdown for the better part of the year to avoid freezing pipes, which almost makes sense because all of our outside drinking fountains, as well as all the water lines for park bathrooms, get blown out here in Fort Collins in the winter. It stops the pipes from freezing. I've had pipes freeze in my house. I understand how that works. But this fact also means that in the winter, Fort Collins does not have a single public source of drinking water that can be accessed year-round. I mean, 24/7. Or we didn't. Because 2 months ago, Foco Cafe installed this hydration station. More good work by social work interns, I will just say. This is the hydration station at Foco. It has a drinking fountain. It has a place to fill your water bottle. It's outdoors, it's accessible all night long, and it doesn't need to be blown out in the winter. This hydration station costs less than 0.25% of what the Old Town Square renovation cost. Money is not the thing that is stopping our community from finding these solutions. It's the dehumanizing mindset that underlies criminalization that people absorb and our city has absorbed, and it is stopping them from thinking that through really obvious solutions. When Sarah wrote back to Matt Robineau and asked him why the DDA couldn't install a feature like this in Old Town Square, he wrote back with the following. It comes down to our inability to ensure a feature that will remain sanitary. Old Town Square is often frequented by patrons that do not adhere to societal norms for the deposit of bodily fluids, thus making it difficult to provide a drinking water feature that can be maintained in a safe, sanitary condition. Foco Cafe has also figured out how to clean their hydration station, right? But once again, we're being told if we don't adhere to societal norms, we don't deserve nice things like drinking water. Finding winterized technology or figuring out how to clean a public space is not that difficult. It's just a design and maintenance question. It's a routine part of running any city. I want to live in a community where people have drinking water all year round. I want to live in a community where we have bathrooms that are open overnight, with sinks where we can wash our hands. And these things are completely possible, but we need to push our city to do the right thing. I'm going to end on that, but I'm going to give you a what you can do slide to sit this on, because I think sometimes when we're talking about a campaign or we're talking about injustice, as an audience member, I get really frustrated when I don't know what to do with my anger. And I'm just an angry person generally, so that would be a lot of frustration. So what we need right now, like if you're looking for something to do next week or the week after, Fort Collins Homeless Coalition does criminalization surveys as part of the work that REP does, as part of our work with Denver Homeless Out Loud around the right to rest. And this year we're adding a second page to that survey where we ask people about bathroom needs and water needs, because as we keep shaping this campaign, beyond just the sites that we've already identified, it makes sense to base those answers. Where do we need 24/7 bathrooms in the experiences of people who actually need those bathrooms? And so we need people who would like to come and administer surveys over the next couple of months. It's an in-person thing. You do the survey one-on-one. We also want to make sure that people don't come and then just feel like they leave and never hear from us again, because I know sometimes it's hard to find out about the stuff that's going on. It's obvious to the people who are in the room, and it's not so obvious if the word maybe hasn't gotten out. So before you leave, there is a sign-up sheet, which I don't know where it is, but it has the option to sign up, okay, for the email list on all kinds of things, including ours. And we will share, Homeless Coalition will share local stuff and also Right to Rest stuff. So please sign up. Join with us anytime that you wish or want or can. And if you're asking yourself how you can do that, Homeless Coalition meets every single Monday that the library is open. We meet at the Old Town Library downtown, and we meet in one of the upstairs meeting rooms. That's a little bit iffy, but if you go to the top of the stairs, there are community meeting rooms. They have glass doors, and they're on the right as you go up to the top of the stairs. If we're not in one of those, there's always a sign saying where we are in the library. 2:00. You can find our website and our Facebook page too, but I just want to stress before I leave you with that, one of the things about doing this work, Homeless Coalition does its work in person. We do not do it online. Online would exclude a large portion of our group and the community that we're trying to work with. So please do come down in person sometime. And I think that's it for me.
Thanks to everyone for coming out, and thanks for our panelists. If you sign up on our email list, we will send you a link to the YouTube video when it comes out.
Today is election day, and it's pathetic, the number of people that don't vote. and you know, together we can make a difference. We can influence who sits on the city council and who's the mayor.